Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and just jump right into it. Real quick, just so you know who I am, I did write the book, or a book on Visual Studio. It's called Coding Faster, Getting More Productive with Microsoft Visual Studio. I know a lot of our customers have it. That's good to hear. A lot of the stuff I'm going to show you comes from that book as well. So if you want to get a deeper dive, you can run out and grab the book. I'm not sure how much it is. Or get your sales rep to get you a copy. All right, so that's mean. I know they're going to get on to me for that. But all right, so I'm just going to jump right into this, folks. And I like to start off with the new project dialog. And just so we're clear, everything I'm going to show you has to do with Visual Studio 2010. If you're not running Visual Studio 2010, the assumption is either you're going to be running it, hopefully within 3 to 6 months. We did add a sort feature. You can now sort your templates if you want to. Kind of useful. It really depends. If you really wanted to have your templates sorted, you can do it now. If not, probably not a big deal. But over to the right is a big deal. Now, if you look way over to the right, you'll see this search installed templates. Now, that's a big deal. It doesn't look like it at first, but it's actually a pretty big deal. What that's going to allow you to do is for the installed templates, you can actually search through them. So if I'm looking for a WCF template, I just type WCF, and it'll automatically filter my installed templates to show me WCF templates. Now notice, it doesn't filter by language right off the bat, but that's easily solved. If you just type in your language of choice, it will then automatically filter by language as well. Now what I tend to recommend is that when you're doing these searches, lead with your language and then go for the technology you're interested in. You notice it's the same result. It's just I like leading with my language, which automatically filters out everything not relevant language-wise, and then I can go to technology. Now, with that said, this isn't like a really massively useful feature for your installed templates as is, because many of you already know where your installed templates are. That's a no-brainer. So you're kind of going, well, wait a minute, this, I know where my installed templates are. What's the usefulness of this? And you're right, by the way. You probably already know where your templates are, so this isn't very useful yet. However, it becomes extremely useful if you use your online templates. Now, I've been doing this a long time. I've talked to thousands of customers, and I know for a fact that the overwhelming majority of people, A, didn't realize this was here, and B, have never really used this. So what is this? Well, if I click on it, this takes me to a special place known as the Visual Studio Gallery. Now, let me show you the Visual Studio Gallery. You can actually get there by just going into your browser and doing a search on Visual Studio Gallery. When you do that, there's a link to the Visual Studio Gallery. And so this is one way you can get to it, through a web page. We're just doing it an easier way through the development environment, right? In the new project dialog, when I click on online templates, it takes me to the Visual Studio Gallery. But that begs the question, what is the Visual Studio Gallery? Why should I care? Well, the Visual Studio Gallery has 3 things you need to care about. It has project templates, and extensions. And those are all extremely valuable. Here we're seeing project templates. You went to create a new project. You went to online templates because none of the installed templates really met what you were trying to do. So you went to online templates, which took us to the gallery. It automatically sorted by highest ranked items. And now, all of a sudden, search becomes your best friend. Now searching is the best thing you ever had, because now you're dealing with a whole bunch of unknown templates, and you want to find a template that might be able to help you with something you're doing. Okay, no problem. Well, again, you'd lead with your language, and then you type in a technology you're interested in. In my case, I'm getting ready to start a WCF app, and I want it to use REST, Representational State Transfer. So I'll start with WCF and see what I get, and if that doesn't yield anything, then I'll continue and type REST. But right away, you'll notice the first hit right here, WCF REST Service Template. Now, when you get a hit, make sure you click on it, and then come over to the right and look at the detailed information. Make sure it's the proper language. Every once in a while, you will get a false positive. You'll say C#, but it'll give you a VB. So watch out. Watch the language. Check who it's created by. If it's created by Microsoft, it's automatically safe. If it's created by someone else, that doesn't mean it's not safe. It just means you need to pay attention to the number of downloads and the rating. We'll get to that. The version number really doesn't mean much at all. In fact, you can completely ignore version number. What you do need to pay attention to is the downloads and the ratings. Now, take a look at this. 61,483 downloads. It's got almost a 5-star rating with 12 votes. And by the way, this is the correct ratio you're going to see on this. the number of ratings, votes, is always going to be an extremely small percentage of the total number of downloads. And the reason for that is real simple. People love stuff, but in the online world, they tend not to actually take the extra effort to tell people they like stuff. So you're always going to have a very, very small percentage of folks here who have voted, which is fine. 61,012, that's about the right ratio. With that said, though, looking at this, I can tell this is a keeper. A lot of people downloaded it, and those who took the time to tell us what they thought about it liked it, right? Because it's only going to go one of two ways. If somebody's going to take the time to tell you about something, they're either going to tell you how much they hated it or how much they liked it. It's never in between. People who are in between don't take the time to write a good review. So, you're either going to love it or hate it. It looks like most people loved it. So this is definitely a keeper. I could download this or begin using this template. I just click on OK. It would download the template, install it, and I could begin using it right away. At that point, it becomes an installed template, and then I can search it as normal. But this is an extremely valuable construct, because if you haven't been using these, and I know 90% of you haven't, you need to start looking at these things. These things will give you a leg up on projects you're about to get involved in. And so if you're about to start a new project and you don't see an installed template that really seems to help, or even if you do, go to the online templates and search them and see if there's an online template that maybe takes it the next step further and gives you even more functionality so that you can just jump in and start writing some code. All right, so I'm going to cancel out of that for now, but I just wanted to drive that point home. The next thing I want to show you is something called box selection. Now, that one's kind of fun. I'm just going to open up a project here. And so I've got a project that I've created here. It's just nothing really overly special, just a regular old project. And I'm just going to hop into one of the files. So basically, box selection works like this, and you've seen it already, I'm sure. If you hold down your Alt key on your keyboard and click and drag with your mouse, you get a box selection. That's not a new concept. The idea of the box selection, I first saw it back in Word 6.0, which I think was about 20 years ago. So the box selection's been around for quite some time, and the concept of it. What's new is the way we use it in Visual Studio 2010. In Visual Studio 2010, the way we use box selection is quite interesting. Now, I'm actually going to use my keyboard for this. I'm going to hold down my Alt key and my Shift key, Alt-Shift, and then I'm going to use my arrow keys. I'm going to come right a little bit and down a little bit. Now, this is just for illustration purposes, but I'm still holding my Alt and Shift key now. I'm going to go ahead and put this thing on a diet, and boom, there it is. Hopefully everybody can see that little skinny thin blue line there. That thin blue line has a special name and a very special purpose. It's called a zero-length box selection, and it's specifically designed to do this. And there you go. So what a zero-length box selection is designed to do, it's designed specifically to be a multi-line live cursor that you can use to edit something. Now, I'll prove it. You see all these 20s? I want them to be 30. So I come in between the 2 and the 0, Alt-Shift-Down arrow. You see the thin blue line? I hit my backspace, type a 3. It's a live multi-line cursor. Now, the one thing we don't have is the telepathic interface, so you still need to change the names of your variables and so on and so forth. But this is pretty darn cool if you've never seen them before. Now, as cool as that is, I don't use that as often as I use another feature. And let me kind of set it up here. Oftentimes I'll have a situation kind of like this. I'll have a private double, Bubba, and something along these lines. And I'll be looking at my variables, and all of a sudden I'll say, you know what, all these ints need to be doubles. So what do I do? Well, the answer is real simple. Here, I'll make my font a little bigger for you guys. The answer is real simple. I do a single copy, so I highlight the word double and copy, do a box selection around all the ints, single copy, multi-line paste, and I just paste. That's very, very, very cool. If you've never seen that before, I use that every single day when I code, because I'm looking at something, I go, no, I want to change it to this, or I want to change it to that, and it's usually a set of variables that I want to modify. So very, very, very powerful. It gets even better than that. If you're looking at a bunch of stuff, you see these are all public doubles now. Let's say I've decided I want them to all be private ints. No problem. Box select what you want to get rid of, and then just start typing. It will automatically turn into a zero-length box selection so you can begin multi-line typing. All right, so I'm going to stop for a minute, get some feedback. Okay, good. What do you guys think of that? You dig on that? You think that's a pretty cool feature? If you're seeing that?
Steven says it's dope.
It's dope. Excellent. Excellent. Very good. All right, cool stuff. Thanks, folks. Appreciate it. I'll check every once in a while, make sure feedback's there. All right, so carrying on. What else do we have for you? Well, there's a lot of neat things that we've got going on. Some of the other things that we have, for example, are improved Intellisense. Now, I wrote the book, or a book, on Visual Studio, Tips and Tricks. I'm known as the Visual Studio guy. And I'm always asked, Zane, what is your favorite feature in Visual Studio? And without a doubt, my number one favorite feature is Intellisense. In Visual Studio 2010, my number one favorite feature is Intellisense. Let me explain why. I don't know if you remember the old days. I'm going to zoom in on it here. Did that come through, Clint, when I zoomed?
Yeah, just take it a little slow. It's coming through, but it's a little slow.
Okay, so what I've got here is the old Intellisense, right? In the old days, when you use Intellisense in Visual Studio, you type, like I've done here, console.key, and then as you start typing key, Intellisense would give you this just ginormous list, right? This huge, enormous alphabetical list of stuff, and then it'd show you whatever begins with whatever you're typing. Okay. Well, what happens if you couldn't remember what something begins with? Well, too bad. And I guess that was it. You could just take your toys and go home, or you'd have to search through this big old list. And by the way, a little trivia for you. In case you don't know, Intellisense was first introduced back in VB5. So in VB5, we had Intellisense. I started coding in VB3, and I remember the days before Intellisense, and then VB5 came along. I was like, oh, this is great. But basically from VB5 until Visual Studio 2008, which is what you're looking at now, Intellisense fundamentally just hasn't changed. It really hasn't. In all those years, it hadn't changed. But that's all out the window now. Now in Visual Studio 2010, Intellisense has radically changed. And I do mean radically. Now if I type something and I get Intellisense, now what I get, and I'm just going to zoom in on it, I know it'll take a second to come in. Now what I get is a way, way different list of stuff. First, look at that scroll bar. That is a significantly smaller list of stuff there. And do you notice anything peculiar about every entry in that list? Notice that every entry in that list, somewhere in it, contains the letters DO. So Intellisense has massively changed. No longer is it a begins with operation. It's a contains operation. Things that contain the letters you type. Now, we did this for a reason, right? We didn't just wake up one day and go, hey, this sounds like a good idea. Well, we did this for a very simple reason. Your names of members and classes and so on are getting longer and more descriptive. It's getting way harder to remember what something begins with. But you can almost always remember something inside of that name. And that's why we've changed it to a contains operation. Now, it gets better than that, as fate would have it. Take a look at the entry called app domain unloaded exception. Now, app domain unloaded exception is an excellent example of Pascal case, where the first letter of each keyword is in uppercase. Well, guess what? Not only is Intellisense now a contains operation, but it is, in fact, Pascal case aware. I'll let that sink in for a minute. So notice I just typed the uppercase A, D, and U, and it automatically showed me app domain unloaded exception. And you may be wondering, well, what if I don't remember all the uppercase letters? Not a problem. Just type as many uppercase letters as you can remember, and it will automatically filter the list for you. Whoops. Didn't quite get where I wanted to get there. Let's try that again. There we go. Hopefully that zooming's working there. But there you go. It will automatically filter the list, and then you can pick from the list. And it is very, 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 Pascal case aware. It's very aware of its surroundings. Hopefully you like that, right? You guys digging on that? That's going to save you a lot of time. You want me to stop zooming? Okay. You guys don't need to zoom? I'm down with that. No problem. All right, cool. But did you guys, in the midst of all that zooming, did you see what I was showing, though? Did you kind of see what I wanted to show you there? Very, very cool stuff, right? App domain, unloaded exception. You see I did uppercase, and it is Pascal case aware. So as long as you know, we went from, you got to know what something begins with, to you got to know, a word inside the name somewhere, to you just got to know a couple of uppercase letters and you're set, right? I mean, seriously, seriously cool. Now, just as an aside, I like to throw in some old tips too. Let me give you a very, very old tip. I don't know if you remember this, but regardless of what version of Visual Studio you use, this will work. Whenever you have Intellisense and you want to see the code underneath it, I don't know if you remember, but if you hold down your Control key on your keyboard, it will make Intellisense transparent, so you can see underneath it. And it's been that way since, I think, since the first version of Visual Studio. But yeah, if you hold down your Control key, Intellisense becomes transparent, so you can see underneath it. That's a very, very old tip. I like giving you old tips and new tips and kind of mixing them up a bit. Very cool. All right, so what else do we have for you today? Well, we've got multi-monitor support. And this is one of the main reasons I think people get Visual Studio 2010 is for the multi-monitor support. It's a real simple concept. In the old days, regardless of version of Visual Studio, you've been able to take tool windows like Solution Explorer, rip them outside the IDE, and stick them on another monitor, right? That's not new. You've been able to do that for quite some time. What is new is the ability to take actual document windows, actual code windows, and rip them outside the IDE and stick them on multiple monitors. That's new. And that's a very, very powerful feature of Visual Studio 2010. So if you're not taking advantage of that, you should be taking advantage of that. Now, and again, you can rip off multiple windows, stick them on multiple monitors, and just really have a good time with it. All right, now with that said, I do have one little problem, though. My problem is whenever I rip these windows off and want to stick them on another monitor, if I want to stack, these two windows together, I can't. Notice they don't stack together and make a nice little tab area like this area here. They're just kind of windows floating out there. They're not related. And that drives me crazy. There's actually a way to fix this, and it's my way of showing you something known as the power tools. What a lot of people don't realize is that they can get a lot of the functionality that's coming, or at least for the IDE, that's coming in the next version of Visual Studio. They can get it in Visual Studio 2010 today. And the way you get it is you actually install the productivity power tools. Let me show you how to do that, by the way. Right? Now, again, make sure you get permission from your manager before you install anything, right? I don't want you coming back saying, Zane said I could do it, I'm going to sue Microsoft, right, type of deal. But if there's ever anything you should install, as soon as you get permission from your manager, this is it. And here's how you install extensions, which, by the way, are out on the gallery, like we talked about before. If you could just go to Tools on your menu bar and click on Extension Manager, Tools Extension Manager. That's going to take you to the Extension Manager. And then if you go to the Online Gallery, now it may not show up for me because I already have it installed, but we'll give it a go. And then if you click on the Online Gallery, it's going to take you to the Visual Studio Gallery. Nope, there it is. Okay.
Zane, I got a question for you.
Oh, sure, yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead. What's the question?
Flip over to the link window.
Our Power Tools extensibility that VS developers created that wasn't formally requested and went through testing. That wasn't formally requested and went through testing. So that's hard. So let me answer it in a broader sense. The question is, more broadly, when it comes to extensions, are they tested and done formally, or how does that work? And there's really two paths there. For community-contributed stuff, I really can't say. If Jimmy Joe submits an extension, it may or may not have been tested. I don't know what rigor they go through. So I can't really answer for that. For Microsoft items, they do go through a minimum level of testing, but they're not rigorously tested like they would shipping code. Then that's not really the goal, right? The goal is to get functionality out there. And many times we'll say this is beta, or this is the shipping version or something like that. So we do put them through a testing and a little rigor there, but probably not as thorough as actual shipping gold code, right? So hopefully that answers your question, Tom. Yeah. So now, does that mean you should not install them? No, of course not. What it means is for those things that you're looking at, and let's take productivity power tools. For those things you're looking at, look at the version, right? I mean, if it's 0.1 or something, it's still kind of beta-ish. Right here, Visual Studio Achievements. Actually, I happen to know this is still in beta. They did 1.1 on it. Maybe they just RTM'd it lately, but this is 1.1, right? So you got it, right? This is version 10.026 billion, blah, blah, blah. Thoroughly tested, over 1 million downloads. You know, this sucker's been through the ringer, right? So you can tell just by looking at the different packages. Hopefully that helps. Okay, so with that said, this is what I want everyone to install, the productivity power tools. This is where we pre-tested a lot of the really cool features that come in the next version of Visual Studio. One of those, it happens to be multiple tab wells, right? Multiple little tab areas. So if you rip documents off and want to put them on multiple screens, you can have little tab well areas, and so they all go together. Now, I happen to turn it off. I actually have this installed, but I've turned it off for this demo. But you'll actually have it when you install it. It's a really, really nice feature. By the way, for any given item that you want to install or learn more about, there's always the more information link. And for this in particular, I really suggest you go to more information and look at it. I mean, there is just a ton of stuff in these productivity power packs. And you may not like everything that's in here. You can actually turn off features that you don't like. I'll show you that in a minute. But just kind of go through and look at all the great stuff that's in there. I mean, it's just fabulous, the stuff that's in there. Okay, so with that said, real quick, I promised you I'd show you where you could turn this off if you get it installed. If you do install this, don't worry. You can always go to Tools and Options. And under Productivity Power Tools, here we go, Productivity Power Tools. So Tools, Options, Productivity Power Tools. You can quite literally turn off or turn on different things that come with the power tools. And you notice in this case, because I knew I was going to demo for you guys, I've turned everything off. When I'm done with this demo, I'm going to turn right around and turn it all back on again because I can't live without it. But just so you know. All right, cool. All right, so some of the other good things that we have out there for you. Call hierarchy. I love this. This is a great feature. There's not much I don't love in Visual Studio. I'm sure you guessed that by now. But the call hierarchy is really near and dear to my heart, and here's why. You know, traditionally when you wanted to look at a call stack for something, the way you do that is you'd find where you kind of want to stop, you'd set a breakpoint, you'd build your code, you'd run your code, you'd hit your breakpoint, you'd open your call stack window, and then you go, oh, now there's a call stack, right? That's just painful on multiple levels. First and foremost, I shouldn't have to build my code just to inspect call stacks. What's that all about? So we fixed that. We have something new called the call hierarchy. Now, currently, it's only available for C++ and C#. However, in the next version of Visual Studio, and I've written articles about this already, I know it works because I've personally used it, VB people do get this feature in the next version of Visual Studio, so what we're calling Dev 11. So how does it work? We'll find any method call or definition, right-click on it, and go to View Call Hierarchy. View Call Hierarchy. Now, when you do that, it's going to give you this lovely little window that's going to show you, or should show you, calls to and calls from the method in question, right? Calls to and calls from the method that you wanted to look at. And you can actually expand those out and get details on it. Check it out. It's actually showing me the method calls coming into FA and the method calls going out of FA. And if I click on any one of these items, over to the right in the area known as the call site, it shows me the detail, which is the calling piece of calling code and the specific line and column position where I can find it and the file name. And if that's still not good enough, you can always double-click on the call site, and it will take you to the line of calling code in your editor, which it just did up here. I'm on line 82 now. So, you know, call hierarchy is just super, super cool, awesome, and, you know, really powerful. And, oh, by the way, in case it got by you, I didn't have to set a breakpoint. I didn't have to build. I didn't have to do anything. Now, you can use call hierarchy in design mode, or you can use it in debug mode. Doesn't matter. In fact, I find myself using call hierarchy in almost all the time now to inspect call stacks. Only when I really want to inspect like super, super deep stacks do I go back to the call stack window. Call hierarchy pretty much gives me everything I need. So I just don't use the call stack window.
Question in the queue.
Okay, let's take a peek. Can someone tell me? No, that's a link question. Does that work through the dependency chain? Tom, it does somewhat. There is an issue. I believe there's a minor issue with currently with going through some interfaces. There is an issue going through some external assemblies. I think they're mostly COM type stuff. Beyond that, it should work through most of what you have. And I will say this, just taking it a step further, we have greatly improved it in the next version of Visual Studio. So it now does actually flow through the entire dependency chain. But really, those were really where we had some major issues. We're kind of hopping between separate assemblies that weren't all in the same solution. But I think we fixed a lot of that. Hopefully that answers your question. Yep, cool.
Zane, another question above it.
Okay, let me see here. Question above it. Can we expect the next version for? Travis. Yeah, as I said before, call hierarchy is supported. It is in VB. Is supported for VB in the next version. In fact, guys, if you really want to get up to speed on the next version of Visual Studio, make sure to go to my blog, and most of you probably know where it is. But if you don't, I'll just whip it up for you. Whoa, I'm getting some weirdness there. My blog, blogs.msdn.com/ZainNab, Z-A-I-N-N-A-B. I've written several articles on the latest items coming out with the latest version of Visual Studio. Also, you can catch some of my work on the, in this particular case, on the Visual Studio team blog or on the VB language blog. But I will always cross-post here so you can find it. So feel free to search here, and you can see I haven't blogged in a little bit. I've been busy doing some other things, but you'll find all the articles will be entitled Visual Studio 11 Developer Preview, and then I'll show you various features that go along with that. And I've personally used just about every feature that I've talked about today, actually every feature I've talked about today, and every feature I blog I have personally used. I won't blog it unless I've used it. Okay, good. All right, so what else we have for you? The breakpoints window, I'm just going to cover off on that real briefly. Basically, the breakpoints window is the biggest improvement we made there is if you set a bunch of breakpoints, you now have the ability. So I'm just setting random breakpoints essentially in this case, right? But if you set a bunch of breakpoints, you now have the ability in the breakpoints window to do some pretty neat things. Let me just kind of show you what those neat things are. First and foremost, in case you haven't noticed, there's a new column in the breakpoints window called the labels column. And a lot of people are wondering what that's for. Well, it's real simple. For any given breakpoint, let me just find one real quick. If you go to any breakpoint and right-click and then go to Edit Labels, you can actually add a custom token to your label. I'll call this Bubba, and I'll click on Add. Now, you can actually add multiple tokens as well. We'll get to that in a minute. But there you go. You can actually add labels to your breakpoints. Now, if you want to do them in bulk, set a bunch of breakpoints, come into the breakpoints window, select all the breakpoints you want to set up labels for, right-click, Edit Labels, and then you can either choose existing labels or add new ones. Blah. And there you go. Right? And yes, you can have multiple labels per breakpoint. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and set up labels for the rest of these real quick, just kind of for demo purposes. Ice cream. And I think we're in good shape there. Okay, good deal. So, first and foremost, the first most obvious, hopefully, most immediate benefit you get from this is you can now sort your breakpoints into some logical sort order that was not possible before. Before this, if you wanted to sort your breakpoints, too bad. You had to sort by one of the columns we gave you. If you didn't like that, well, that was it. Now you can add custom labels and put these things into some logical domain sort order that makes sense to you. And that's kind of what I've done here, right? You can sort ascending or descending, doesn't matter. In addition to that, though, and this is where it gets really cool, we've added the ability to search your breakpoints. You can now search your breakpoints. So I'm going to search for any breakpoint that has the letter B. B as in boy, anywhere in it. Press enter, and nothing appears to happen. The reason nothing appears to happen is by default, this thing searches all visible columns. Now, at first glance, you'll go, well, wait a minute. I mean, these have B's in them, but these don't, right? So where's that coming from? Well, wait a minute. It's all visible columns. So if you keep going to the right, notice the letter B in break. Well, that's a B, so there you go. So that's kind of a gotcha you got to watch out for. Whenever you do a search in your breakpoints, it is a contains operation, by the way. So you can look for anything that contains whatever. But whenever you're doing that, make sure to pick the correct column you want to search in. So what I really meant to do was search my labels. So if any label has the letter B anywhere in it, then go ahead and show me that breakpoint. So you see what I've done here? And that actually leads to another very important item. And this is really important.
Hey, Zane, there's a question in the queue.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Let's take a peek. Can we turn breakpoints having certain labels off during debugging? Yeah, actually, that's where I'm going with this. Check this out. You'll love this. So that gets to the next piece, right? Check this out. But now that we're able to search, everything you do in the breakpoints window, will only impact the results of the current search criteria, right? You remember delete all breakpoints? Well, let's now delete all breakpoints matching the current search criteria. Same thing with disable all breakpoints, matching the current search criteria. Now, what is the impact? Well, let me show you the impact. So let's say that I've got all these breakpoints, right? By the way, I cleared the search by clicking on this X over here. So I'm clearing the search, and I've got all these breakpoints. So I disable them all, right? But then I want to search for those breakpoints that have the letter B in it because I want to enable those. So I do a search. By the way, when you're doing searches, lead with your column and then put in your search term. That's the way it should be done. So notice here now, I haven't pressed enter yet. Here I go. I'm pressing enter now. And notice I got a filtered list. So I enable those. And what happened? Well, if you clear the search, you can see that only the ones that were visible at the time I enabled were enabled, right? So only those things that are visible at the time you do something will feel the impact of that action, which is extremely powerful. I mean, I'm sure you guys are getting it. I'm seeing a lot of writing, right? Hopefully you guys are getting this. This is awesome. What this means is you have unprecedented control over breakpoints that was never, ever possible before. You went from having a sledgehammer, right, delete all breakpoints, to now, a scalpel for doing fine surgery on your breakpoint. All right, I'm seeing a lot of, yeah, exactly. Very, very useful, Tom. Very useful. Seeing a lot of people seem to think that, Clint, can you still see my screen? Folks, are you able to see my screen still?
Yep, you're good. It looks like we're kind of hitting our upper limit on our conference size, okay. 300 attendees. So
yeah, we expected that, folks. In case I failed to mention it, you're kind of guinea pigs in our little test today. We've done live meetings traditionally. We opted to go with a link session and really test the limits for this. And if things get rough, we do have another session we can do as a backup for this. So we'll make sure if it comes to that we have that set up. But we really kind of want to push the limits, see what we could do with the link meetings because we'll be using those going forward. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead. Any questions about this, though? Let's see. The beep. Turn off the beep. Okay, so I can't turn off the beep. That's actually done at your end. That's an option you can set. Yeah, we will have recordings later for any coworkers who happen to miss this, so we'll let the folks do that as well. And I'm going to let Clint field the rest of those. All right, so one other thing before I leave the world of breakpoints, folks. We now actually have the ability to export and import breakpoints. Seriously, seriously cool. Now, a lot of people think we did that so you could have backups of your breakpoints. Okay, no. No. We did it so you can share breakpoints with other team members. So you can literally export your breakpoints. Well, I'm clicking on here, export your breakpoints. I'll just breakpoints XML. It does export it as an XML file, so you can export your breakpoints. And then on the other side, when your team member gets the source, they can import the breakpoints file and get all the lovely breakpoints. Now, that's the good news. The bad news is if you export your breakpoints, but then make some changes to the source code before you put your source back in, and then your partner comes and imports your breakpoints file, they're going to be very unhappy with you because they're going to have breakpoints where breakpoints shouldn't be. You get the idea? So watch out for that. The order of operations is always, set the source, check the source in, export your breakpoints, check in your breakpoints file, right? Don't do it in the other order because it'll get you into trouble. All right, so let's take a peek. Does source code have to be exactly the same for both coworkers? Yes, it does for the breakpoints, only for the exported breakpoints. But, presumably, with any luck, you're not working on the exact same, piece of code at the same time. That could be bad. But yes, it does need to be the same, that like you share it. Typically, you'll have people who do things in shifts or, switch code between each other. That's what this was designed for. Specifically designed for that. Now, one other point I want to make, though, since you asked it, what I have seen people do, and I thought this was really cool, I have seen people create chunks of breakpoints and then export them, and then they'll get rid of the breakpoints, and then whenever a problem comes up, they have these breakpoint files that are labeled that are specifically designed to work with certain problems that they're having. And that's kind of cool, right? So they'll have a set of breakpoints specifically designed to troubleshoot whatever. And that works out pretty well. So you might want to play with that. I've seen that used to great effect at some of our bigger customers. All right. So moving right along. Some of the other things we have, data tips. Data tips are awesome. Data tips are your friend. Data tips are just an incredible feature. My buddy Clint loves them. Let me just kind of show you how they work. I'm just going to clear out these breakpoints since I don't need them anymore. But when it comes to data tips, essentially the way it works is like this. Maybe you're debugging your code, and data tips aren't a new idea. We've added some new functionality to them. And so when you're running your code and you're just kind of minding your own business, and you click on your there it is. Uh-oh. Okay. Looks like I experienced a problem and needed to close. All right, not cool. Let's see if we can recover from that.
We all have those days.
Yep. Dark Angel of Demos decided to visit me. Let me see if I can spin up again. Sorry about that, folks. Not sure what happened there. We'll spin it up here. Looks like it's coming back online pretty quick. And, all right, let's go ahead and set those breakpoints. And we are ready to rock and roll. Okay. There we go. And so when I hit a breakpoint, right, I've hit a breakpoint. If you put your mouse over a variable, you get a data tip, right? It's been that way for quite some time now. And of course, data tips, you can change the values of something, 54, whatever, right? That's not new. This should not be new information to you. What is new is this little push pin here at the end. Now that's cool. Now what does that do? Well, if you click on it, it allows you to pin down or create a pin to source data tip. Now what's a pin to source data tip? Well, a pin to source data tip is really, really cool. Let me just kind of lower my font size a bit here. What a pin to source data tip does is as you step through your code, it stays pinned to the line you've pinned it to. But that begs the question, how do I know it's pinned? Well, look over to the left. You see the little push pin here? So that shows you the line that it's pinned to. And if you want to, you can even click and drag these things and pin them to different lines. But the value of a pin data tip is, as you're stepping through your code, pin data tips get out of your face when they're no longer relevant. So when that variable goes out of scope, I pinned it to the line where the variable was, and when it's no longer relevant, it just kind of scrolls out of my face. That's the value of a pinned data tip. By the way, these data tips come with little items that you can use, like you can expand to see comments, and you can even put in custom comments, and you can put quite a few comments in. You can even collapse these comments, so you can expand or collapse the comments. Really, really nice feature. Now, there's more. That's great for locally scoped variables. By the way, you can have as many of these as you want, right? Just go nuts. Create as many of these things as you want. Let me kind of get rid of that. All right, just go crazy with this stuff. It's fun. But what happens if I've got, say, a higher level variable, like a class level variable I want to keep an eye on? What do I do then? Well, you pin it, just like you would a pinned data tip, right? Hang on, let's pin down. You pin it, but then you turn right around and you unpin it. Now, there's two kinds of data tips we have. There's pin data tips that stay to the line you pin them to get out of your face when they're no longer relevant. And then there's floating data tips, which is what this is. And floating data tips are a dashboard experience. They stay in your face all the time. And in fact, they can even be put on other monitors if that's where you want to take them, right? You can see here I've got some leftover stuff. You want to drag them and stick them on another monitor? Go nuts. You can take floating data tips and stick them wherever you want. But they're a dashboard experience. They float above everything so that they're always in your face and you can see relevant data at all times. Now, with that said, pinned and floating data tips are awesome, but that is not the coolest feature. The coolest feature manifests itself when you stop debugging. You see, when you stop debugging, oftentimes you'll look at a chunk of code and you'll go, man, I totally forgot what the value of D was, and I need to see what the value of D is. Well, no problem. If it was a pinned data tip, just put your mouse over the push pin, and it will show you the value from the last debug session. So even after you're done debugging, pinned data tips are your best friend. They will show you the value from the last debug session. Very, very, very powerful. What do you think of that? Pretty cool? Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, that's some seriously cool stuff, folks. And that is my buddy Clint. Of the stuff I teach, that's Clint's favorite feature, just so you know. All right, so he loves that. And then he does something really cool you're going to see later on. My favorite feature, what he does, is the architecture diagrams. Love those things. All right. All right, so what else we got for you? Skip over that. Code analysis is kind of an interesting feature. If you haven't seen it, I'll just touch on it lightly, and then we'll start wrapping up here. But code analysis is really cool. With code analysis, essentially what you can do for any given project in your solution, you can right-click and go to Properties of the project. So go to the Properties of any project. And then when you're looking at the Property tabs, there's this tab called Code Analysis. And if you click on the Code Analysis tab, it's going to show you this. But that begs the question, what is code analysis? Well, code analysis...
There's a question in the queue real quick.
Sure, absolutely. Can we export the pinned data tips just like breakpoints? You know what? My bad. I totally forgot to tell you. Yes, absolutely you can. If you've got pinned data tips, if you go to debug on your menu bar, you can export your data tips and import them just like your breakpoints. Yes, you can. I'm sorry. I normally tell people that. I totally forgot. Great question. Thanks for asking. You absolutely can export and import your data tips. And it does export and import both floating and pinned data tips. Yeah, very, very powerful feature. My bad. Closed caption. All right, so code analysis. Code analysis is a set of rules that you can run against your code to really see how good your code is, or to see if you're meeting some rules that you may have set for yourself or that have been pre-established. And I'll just show you some of these. By the way, whenever you start code analysis, it automatically defaults to the Microsoft minimum recommended rule set. And so that's what I'm going to start with here. I'm just going to click on the Open button. And when I do that, it's going to take me to a whole bunch of wonderful rule sets here. These are all the sets. They're kind of clustered together. I need to expand them out. And then I can look at individual rule items. And once I do that, down at the bottom, it's going to show me help for those items. Actually, it's going to show me help now. There we go. Need to click on OK. And it'll actually show me help for each individual item. And so, like, for example, this one, CA1009, declare event handlers correctly. Notice it has a unique identifier. It has a name, which I really kind of think of as a description, and it has an action, or what will happen if the rule is broken. By default, everything you get from us is warnings, although you can change that if you like to something else, like errors where it even breaks the build. Down at the bottom half of this pane, you're going to get deep, detailed description over what this thing is. What causes the rule to be broken, what specifically the rule is looking for, how to fix violations if you find them, whether or not you should suppress this. You actually have the ability to suppress warnings of a certain type if you so desire. Absolutely, if it says don't suppress, seriously, don't suppress, right? Because they rarely say that. Example code of what good code would look like that passes the rule set, the rule check, right? And so on and so on, related rules, and it just goes on and on. Okay, so there you have it. And so that's essentially what the code analysis does. And then you could run the code analysis rules, and I'll just do it real quick. And so if I'm in Solution Explorer and I want to quickly run code analysis, I just right-click on my project and click on Run Code Analysis. Run Code Analysis.
Question.
Yeah, okay. And when I do that, it's going to run the code analysis, and it's going to give me some errors here. And then I can, or warnings in this case, and then I can make a decision as to whether or not I need to pay attention to these warnings or not. You'll notice in this case it's giving me like value is never used, assigned but never used. Let's say that I've decided that from a business perspective that's okay. So I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to suppress, well, it should give me a suppress. No, it doesn't. Okay. Well, normally it give me a, oh, you know what, that's, there we go. That's not a, you know why? It's not a rule violation. There we go. There's a rule violation. I can right-click on this and suppress message and actually suppress the message either in source code or in a project suppression file. Let me address the question real quick. Would you have to apply rules manually across projects in the same solution? You have to do it the first time once, yes. But then beyond that, no. Now hang on. That's not completely true, because in fact you can script the running of the rules using an external utility known as fxcop, right? fxcop. And a lot of people do that. They'll run the rules like on the build server or something, and using that, then you could just script it out and just tell it to use the one rule set for every project in the solution. So there are workarounds from a scripting standpoint, but from doing it from the IDE standpoint, there's only one way to do it. You got to go into the properties, code analysis, and tell it what rule set to use. And by the way, you can in fact make custom rule sets and so on. Yes, there is a set that you can use to run on TFS for your build definitions. And in fact, it's quite common to run them on your TFS server to make sure that, as an extra quality check to make sure that everything's going okay. So yes, absolutely, you can run them locally, and you can run them on your build server. FXCop is the one checking rules, whereas StyleCop checks things like, are you putting your parentheses in the right place? Are you putting your curly brackets on a separate line? That's what StyleCop kind of does for you. So StyleCop and FXCop together are very, very powerful. You already have FXCop. FXCop is code analysis, right? So you have FXCop, if you will, but StyleCop's really cool if you've never seen it or used it. I certainly recommend you take a look at it. All right, and that should be just about it. Clint, can you think of anything there? I'm getting ready to wrap up. You about ready to take a break?
You got 10, 15 minutes if you need it.
Yeah, and I think we'll go ahead and stop there then. That's a good break time. So let's go ahead and stop there. We'll take a break, folks. We'll take a break for 5 minutes. When you come back, my buddy Clint will pick up and we'll take it from there.
Have you ever inherited someone else's code? All right, and it's a trick question. I know you have. Everybody has, and in fact, it's pretty common in this industry, and it's actually pretty rare now to get a brand new greenfield project from scratch. Most of us do work on existing code bases, right? It's the norm. It turns out that that's one of the major themes for Visual Studio 2010. All of the leadership members of the team read this particular book, Working Effectively with Legacy Code by Michael Feathers, and were greatly influenced by what he wrote in that book, and it went into a lot of thinking into Visual Studio 2010. And in particular, these 4 reasons to change software was something that really resonated with him. So we've got adding a feature, fixing a bug, improving the design of your code base, or optimizing it for resource usage. Now, of those 4 things, only one of those actually typically requires cutting new code, right? Adding a feature. So 3/4 of our work on code bases deals with working with existing code. So wouldn't it make sense for us to spend a lot of time and build some great tooling around that? And that's what we've done. So that is my last official slide. We're going to switch over to Visual Studio. And what I thought I'd do is walk you through a scenario where I've inherited this application. So let's say I'm a brand new team member who just got brought in to add some features and fix a few bugs on this project. Fairly sight unseen, right? I just started on Monday. They gave me the location and source control, so go check it out, right? So the first step's always, let's go to source control, let's right-click, get latest version, cross our fingers, close our eyes, and hope everything comes up and compiles, right? So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and build it real quick, and we'll run it, and just see what we've got, right? And this is where we typically do that little dance. We're going to go find the missing dependencies, go get any third-party libraries installed that we may not have, but I think in this case everything is in pretty good shape. So I'm going to go ahead and run quick, and we'll see what this application actually is. Check the queue here while we're waiting. Everybody doing okay? Yep, Tailspin MVC. Yes, it is.
Yep. You're good, Clint. I'm watching it.
All right. Yep, it is an MVC app. I do have the reference application out on my website. May have to go back a few blog postings back, but the source code is out there. All right, so this is a very straightforward, very simple e-commerce website for a small brick-and-mortar hobby shop that sells toys and toy rockets, model airplanes, model helicopters. So very basic. We can go in and browse some categories. Just kind of spin up here. We can go take a look at a product. You can see all the details for that product. You see a little related products reference engine here. We can add it to a shopping cart. So your very basic, bare bones e-commerce website. So nothing crazy. All right, so that's good. It actually runs. I can add something to the cart. So first sniff test doesn't look too bad here. So at this point, what I would typically do when I inherit a project is literally start at the top of the solution, go one project at a time, and do a manual code inspection, right? And somewhere between 1 day to 3 days later, I would have a pretty good sense of not only the quality of the code, but also just the overall architecture of this application. But there turns out there's some better tools for doing that now. So the first tool I want to show you is called a dependency graph. So I'm going to go to Architecture, Generate Dependency Graph. We've got a number of options here by assembly, by namespace, by class, include file. For those of you in C and C++, we do support that. But what I'm going to do is just start with the top one by assembly. Because what I want to do is see how all of these different assemblies connect to each other. So we'll give that a few seconds to run. It's going to go through, analyze, make sure everything's compiled, analyze all the dependencies between all the different projects in the solution, and generate a nice graph for us. Give it a second here. Make a little real estate on my screen. All right, so here we go. Here's what we get. Now, a couple of things I usually do right up front. Well, first of all, what this diagram represents is what the Visual Studio team calls the veins and arteries viewed in an application. And the thicker these lines, the thicker that vein or that artery that connects these different pieces together. So obviously some things are going to be very tightly coupled, right, have a very strong dependency on other things. In this case, we see here externals. That actually contains most of the .NET framework. That's stuff external to this source base. I would expect all those lines to be nice and thick. In fact, in this case, we have to have that to do our job, so I'm not really concerned about that. So what I typically do is hit delete, take that out of the drawing. And another one I see jumps out is generics. Again, just like the framework, generics are kind of a natural byproduct of how we write code these days, so I'm not real concerned with the fact that they're using generics. It's just interesting to note that they are. So I'm going to highlight that and hit delete as well. And now what we're getting down to is really the guts of this application, the meat of the architecture. You can see that a very strong dependency tree here. We've got a repository, we've got some kind of domain test model, depending on model. We've got a website, we've got this admin app, we've got an actual tailspin.model, which I believe is the business model or the business logic library in this case, and we've got an infrastructure deal as well. Now testing, while it is important, it's not architecturally significant. It's just important to note that they are doing some level of testing. In this case, the only thing they're testing is their business layer. It's good to note that, but I'm going to highlight that and hit delete. And here we go. What are we left with? This is really, truly what I consider the architecture of this application at its highest level. One interesting thing to note right off the bat is we've got this tailspin.admin.app.exe, and it's kind of an orphan out here. Now, typically, most applications do have cross dependencies with other parts of the project, so it is a little unusual to see this application off there by itself. Now, in this particular story or this particular case, I could go dive into the code, but it turns out that the person who worked on this before me still works at the company, so I go bug them. Right? I call them up and say, hey, I'm looking at this application. I've noticed this one particular piece just sits out on its own, has no dependencies on the rest of the code base. What's going on? It's like, well, yeah, that's a long story, but the short of it is we inherited this application. That admin app was already in place, and it was originally an Access database with this little tool that let the store manager manage his inventory, and that was out of scope for this project. All we were hired to do was build an e-commerce website, so that kind of just came along for the ride. And that happens, right? It's actually fairly common to pull in some old legacy pieces, and if it's out of scope to work on that, it just stays where it is. But at least we're fortunate enough to have that pulled into the same source code repository. Now the good news is this was an Access database. They were able to convert that to use SQL Server on the back end, point the same application at SQL Server, and now we can have a website and our back-end admin tool both share the same database. So that's a small win there at least. And it is what it is. Looking at the rest of this, you can see we've got simple SQL repository. Note the number in the corner. That tells you how many child elements are at the next level deep. That one's got one element below it. Tailspin Web has 6. That's the presentation layer or the website. We've got a model here, tailspin.model. That's the business library. And then we've got this tailspin.infrastructure. And I'm assuming that's where all the shared componentry, collection classes, data access framework, any kind of plumbing that we might need for this application lives in there. But let's start at the top. I'm just going to crack this open and take a little bit of a peek down below. So tailspin.web.dll, if I pop that open, what we see, let me zoom in just here, what we see is there are 6 namespaces inside this particular layer, this particular DLL. We've got tailspin.web.controllers, tailspin.web, system.web.mvc. Wait a minute, that looks a little funny. Why would we have a Microsoft namespace inside of our code base, right? I would expect everything inside of this assembly to be tailspin.web.something, since that's the root namespace for this assembly. So this looks a little fishy. If I crack that open, what I see in here, there's this class called controller extensions. There's 18 methods inside that class. Now I could continue to drill down in here, or if I double click on that, it'll take me to the sample code, or the source code for this particular class. And sure enough, here's that class, controller extensions. There's the namespace. And what it looks like they're doing, I noticed the keyword this, that tells me that what they're doing is they're adding their own methods to the system.mvc controller class. Now, typically when you're dealing with MVC and you're dealing with controllers, this is probably not the best way to approach this. The right way to do this is actually use inheritance, derive your own controller, tailspin.controller, and add these methods on here. So this looks like a pretty known bad practice. So that might be something I would want to take a look at and maybe refactor. We keep chugging along here. Here's another one. This one's pretty neat. There's 9 classes inside this namespace. It's called double colon. And for those of you who have never done any C or C++, this is the shorthand notation to represent the global namespace. That means in this particular case there are 9 classes with no namespaces attached to them at all. So if I pop that open and take a look, let's see what we've got inside here. Zoom out. All right, we've got Bootstrapper and Site Registry. Notice as I click on these things, you see the lines. Those blue lines indicate the pieces of code elsewhere that are dependent on there. And if I hover over it, you get this little glyph. You can traverse back and forth and see where the actual dependencies are. But in this case, I'm still looking really at the overall architecture or structure of this application. So Bootstrapper Site Registry. I mean, what the heck? Let's double click on those and see what they are. All right, it takes me right into the source, and sure enough, it looks like these are some configuration classes to help start up StructureMap. Now, StructureMap's a dependency injection framework. It's an open source project, and I can tell you I've used it before, and I think I know why there's no namespace on these, and that's because the sample code that you download with the source with the open source DLLs has no namespaces around it. So this is really just a simple case where they just grabbed the source, popped it in, and kept on trucking. Again, not a great practice. I would put a namespace around that. I mean, honestly, it needs to be in something, right? Maybe tailspin.web. I don't know, startup or bootstrap, or just tailspin.web. Just leave it in the root of the website, since it's configuration and startup stuff. So very minor refactoring. Clean this thing up. Keep on going. Now these are kind of fun. F_anonymous type 0, F_anonymous type 1, type 2, type 3. I always ask folks when we do this live, if anybody have any guess what this might be. The F underscore is a huge hint, and so is the fact that it's called anonymous type. Now in .NET, there are a couple of things that generate anonymous types or anonymous classes for us under the covers. In this particular case, what this anonymous type is doing is implementing a function. That's what the F underscore means. So there are 2 things. There are lambda expressions, which are nothing more than functions chained together, and then there are link queries, which are turned into lambda expressions underneath the covers. So it looks really scary, but in this particular case, these are just like generics. It's a natural byproduct of the way we write code. These things are just what ultimately gets compiled when we do a lambda expression or a link query. So they look scary, but they're actually not that big of a deal, so I usually take them out of the diagram. All right, what are we left with? 3 more classes here: customer extensions, order extensions, and product extensions. Now we already saw another class called controller extensions, so I'm starting to maybe see an anti-pattern here. But most importantly, what I see is check out the dependency lines. The only lines of dependency on these classes are dependencies inside of another project or inside the solution. So tailspin.models. What this tells me is they're actually adding extensions to the customer domain class or the customer business class. They're adding extension methods to the orders business class and products. Probably not a great practice, right? If we've got the source code to all of this inside of our own solution, why would we be using extension methods to add custom methods to a class in another part of our source code. So it looks a little fishy. It's probably worth investigating a little bit more. So if we keep on trucking, we've got another one down here, tailspin.web.app.controllers. Now we already had tailspin.web.controllers, so I'm looking at a little bit of redundancy here maybe. So let's crack this one open. It's got one class in it, home controller, and then we'll crack this one open. It's got 3, cart controller, order controller, and products controller. Now, I'll let you guys, but there's only 4 controllers in this whole project. I don't really see a big need to separate them into different namespaces. There's no value gain from doing that. So this is a simple case where, you know, maybe 2 different people worked on it and they didn't even know the other one was there, so they just created a new one. So I would collapse these down to just one namespace and call it a day, right? It's just anything we can do to clean up this architecture, make it more maintainable, make it easier to understand for the next person to come along behind this and work on it, the better it's going to be. And to wrap this up, finally, tailspin.infrastructure, this last one. This is kind of interesting because, you know what, we've already got tailspin.infrastructure.dll. Why would we be replicating a namespace from a completely different project in the solution? Let's crack that open and see what we've got. All right, we've got CSS extensions, currency extensions, HTML extensions. Wow, anybody see a pattern? Somebody went crazy with extension methods. You know, and I joke at Microsoft's expense, but you know what I think probably happened is at the point in time when the last developer was working on this, they probably went to the Microsoft office and saw one of our evangelists talk about what's new in C#. And one of the cool things they saw was extension methods. And like all good developers, they got a shiny new hammer. They went back home and they found nails to hammer down with that, right? And we've all done it. I know I'm guilty of it. And the fact is, this is probably a little bit of an overkill, right? The anti-pattern is actually called the golden hammer. You've got this brand new shiny hammer and everything looks like a nail. So I would look at this very closely and see if maybe there were some better ways to do this, because it's just getting to be a little bit too prevalent. And finally, we've got this last one here, structure map controller factory. Now we already saw some other setup code for structure map back in, where was it? It was in the global namespace. So what I would probably do is make sure that that structure map control plus those other 2, the bootstrapper and site registry, all 3 of those are together because they all work together to configure structure map. And then, you know, I would put them probably in tailspin.web in the root namespace, or maybe tailspin.web.bootup, something. Anyway, go on and on. What I wanted to do is show you guys just real briefly how I could take a look at the quality and the structure of this application at a pretty level very quickly and easily, and in my opinion, clean it up and get it into better shape. So that is a dependency graph. That's our first tool for looking at how we would analyze the architecture of an application. Now the next tool I want to show you is called Architecture Explorer. Let me close some windows here. And I can get to that by going to View, Architecture Explorer. And what that brings up is, you know, Zane showed you the call hierarchy view. What this shows is, in fact, it's actually, they're all a subset of the dependency graph. So we analyze the entire connectivity between everything in the application, all the way down to the method and property level. And what we do is we just present that information in different ways. You know, you can do it through the dependency view, you can do it through the call hierarchy window, or you can do it from Architecture Explorer, which lets me browse the entire application either logically, starting with namespaces and going down into classes, properties and methods, and down into individual calls, or you can look at it from a physical perspective, looking at the project files themselves, the source code files, and then anything, you know, again, back into logical representation, anything they contain all the way back down. What do I typically use this for? It's very straightforward. I'm looking at the architecture, right? So what I'm looking for are architectural smells. So in this particular case, what I would expect to see, looking at this from a logical perspective, is every namespace in this project should be tailspin.something, right? Tailspin.model, tailspin.tests. And right off the bat, there's some funny stuff. We already saw global earlier. Those need to be cleaned up. There's system.web.mbc. Those are the 2 namespaces we found earlier. But here's another one, commerce.domaintests.products. It's got 1 class in it. Looked like it's some unit testing code. If I double-click on that, I'm going to go take a look at the code. And sure enough, there's the namespace, commerce.domaintests.products. And it is test harness for the product model class. If we look in Solution Explorer, I think it's in the right place. If we go into the test.model, yeah, there it is, products.productTest. So according to good .NET conventions, the namespace should be tailspin.test.model.products, right? That's the convention that we follow in most good projects. Where did this come from? No idea. So pick up the phone, we call the person that worked on this before me, and ask them, I'm looking at some funny stuff here. I mean, where did this commerce.domaintest.products come from? Like, oh yeah, that's a cool story actually. It turns out that we had just written an e-commerce website for another customer when this customer came along. And so why rewrite the whole e-commerce website from scratch when you can copy and paste? So what we did is we took the entire project out of source control, created a new project for Tailspin, plugged it in, and then renamed all the namespaces. And the original name for the e-commerce engine was called Commerce. So what probably happened is we just forgot a few namespaces when we did the refactoring. So in this case, this is very low risk. I would change this in a heartbeat, right? Get this to the right namespace, simplify this project, avoid any ambiguity or any kind of cross-wiring in the future, and then keep on trucking, right? And this is in the test project, so the risk is even lower. It's not even part of the shipping code. So moving right along, that was commerce.domaintest.products. We already saw global earlier, system.web.mbc, admin, Tailspin. Everything looks pretty good until we get to the bottom. And sure enough, here's another one, test.mocks. All right, everything else is Tailspin. Why is this test.mocks? Double click on it. Let's go take a look. Test.mocks. It's some mocking code, again, dealing with the testing harness. So if I go into Tailspin test model, there it is, mock product and mock shipping. So those are those two classes. So again, these are just some refactoring and renaming of namespaces that didn't happen when the project moved over. May not mean much to you as a team lead, as an architect, someone trying to keep the project clean moving forward. That kind of stuff just drives me nuts. So again, and quickly and easily I can find this stuff and very quickly and easily get it refactored and back in the source code, and it'll never be an issue again. All right, so that is Architecture Explorer. That's the second way we can kind of look at our project from a high level. The next thing I want to show you is let's take a look a little bit more in depth at some of the actual source code and how it goes together. So with Visual Studio 2010, we introduced a new project type called the Uml Modeling Project. Now in that project we support a number of different models. I'm going to show you a couple here. I'm going to go add new item. I'm going to create a brand new UML class diagram. Say add. Give it a second here. It's got to check this stuff out of source control. All right, there we go. So now I have a blank drawing surface class diagrams, and I've got a toolbox over here. So of course I could go drag it in here and do customer and shopping cart and all that good stuff. But what I want to do is look at the structure of existing code. So using class diagrams in combination with Architecture Explorer, what I can do is go in and browse my source code base. In this case, let's go take a look at some of the business entities. Let's go grab that customer. So I'm going to grab customer. Maybe we'll grab, I don't know, shopping cart's pretty good. Maybe we'll grab that. Control-click, shopping cart, control-click, shopping cart item. So I've highlighted three classes, and I'm going to literally drag and drop them onto the drawing surface. It's going to go make sure everything's compiled, go parse that code, and reverse engineer the classes that go along with that code base. And here we go. We've got a nice class diagram showing the relationship, not just the code, but the actual relationships between those three classes. Notice there's the fully qualified name here. You stretch it out a little bit. If you right-click on them, you can say hide qualified name. If I do that, control-click, hide qualified name. There we go. And what you see all the properties, public, private, protected, all the operations on them, and again, the interaction or the relations between these different classes. So a great way to get your head around a code base that you're not familiar with without having to do a manual code inspection and code review. Much, much quicker to get to kind of grok the sense of what's going on. So that's class diagram, and those are just added to the project. I could have given it a new name. It just called it that. Of course, when I save it, I could pop in a new name, but that's a class diagram. That lets us look at the structure of our application internally. The next one I want to show you is a sequence diagram, which lets us look at the dynamic interaction between our classes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go down to the web project. I'm just going to go grab the first controller, cart controller, and let's scroll down to the first action. and that's called Add Item. So this is the first piece of code in our website that's hit when a user adds an item to the shopping cart from the website. So I'm going to right-click on that, and I'm going to say Generate Sequence Diagram. I'm going to pop up this little dialog. I think the default for depth is 3. I like 5. It's a little bit deeper, but all the other options, the defaults are great. So it'll check the solution and anything external. It'll exclude properties and system calls, so I just like to leave that and say OK. It's going to parse the code, go 5 levels deep in the call hierarchy, and generate a really nice sequence diagram. Now I'm going to zoom out real quick so you can see the scope here. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different objects all involved in this particular sequence, starting from the point when the user clicks on Add the Item to the controller. So you can see we go to a repository and we get the product from a repository. If it's null, we throw an exception because we're not expecting, if they click on a product, that it's not in our database. If it's all okay, then we add it to the shopping cart, right? You can see here, notice the top of the line, this is just called the message. This is just free-form text. It could be anything you want. The bottom of the line, when we parse
Hey, Clint,
question?
just real quick, some people missed that. They said, wow, do that again. They kind of like what you just did.
All right, let me throw it away and do it again. See? So I'm going to go to cart control. You can pick any method in your entire source code base, right? Just right-click on it. Put the cursor on the name of the method, right-click and say Generate Sequence Diagram. Tell it how many levels deep. I like 5. Leave all the other settings alone. They're fine. And click OK. It's going to parse our code and automatically generate a call hierarchy for us with all that stuff in there. Now, what I like to show is that the message itself is on the top. This is just free-form text. In fact, I can draw these myself, right? They're just diagrams. When we parse them from code, the top part is the free-form text. We just grab the method name. The bottom, underneath the line, shows you the actual call on the object. So you get to see a little more detail about it and how it's wired directly to the object. So again, this is a great way to get your head around an existing code base. This is much more concise than reading the code, especially when you're talking 5 or 6 different source code files and you've got to pop between them to try to figure out what's going on. I mean, there's no arguing the logic. This is exactly what's going on inside this code base for that entire transaction, including, you can see a link query here. So you can see the logic. Checking to see if it is null. If it's the new quantity is greater than or less than 0, you remove it. So just fantastic stuff. I'll warn you now, put your request in for larger monitors. Stuff is not small. You want nice big monitors to be able to do all this. I'm running 1024 by 768. This is not ideal for doing any kind of UML. So that is a sequence diagram. Now, at this point in time, those are the only diagrams we can automatically generate from code. I wish we could do more, but honestly, I have not looked at the preview of Visual Studio vNext, so I don't know how much more we've added, but those are the 2 we can generate from code right now. To round out the rest of the models, I want to show you what we support. Go to my modeling project. So the next one I want to show you is a component diagram. Now what this represents are the physical pieces or the physical output from your project. In fact, this one was probably drawn before the project was up and running. Typically, once you get somewhere where you actually have some detail, you go ahead and plug in the actual names. That's tailspin.web.dll, tailspin.model. You get the idea. The idea is to show the physical components and how they're interrelated. The dotted lines indicate a reference through the project or through the right, so there's an implied reference there. A solid line, in this case the solid line with a little lollipop notation, that indicates communication over a wire. In this particular case, using the lollipops is how you indicate communication over a wire using known protocols. In this case, we've got ADO.NET on the client end, and we've got T-SQL over TCP/IP on the server end of the database. I could certainly go in here and plug in, the name of all the databases, dev, QA, production, all that stuff. Again, the point here is to show all the physical pieces. And this is a great diagram to share with an operations person, whether it's network operations or desktop support. Anyone who needs to understand how these pieces fit together and where they live in a network environment, this would be of value to them. I like this comment. So this is what we think we're doing. So this was definitely drawn early on. Again, as you go through iterations of your project, typically an architect will go through and make sure these are up to date. That is a component diagram. The next one, so those three are really what I consider to be design diagrams. The other two diagrams we support are what I call analysis diagrams. And the first one is a use case diagram, and this is used for discussing with your customer and analyzing the problem space, right? So who are the actors or roles, and what are the activities they're trying to accomplish? So it's more on the analysis side as opposed to actually building a solution. And again, these are all drawings, right? I could go in here and add another, registered shopper, give them a couple of their own use cases, receive coupons, I don't know.
Hang on, Clint, looks like one or two folks missed that. If you could do that again real quick.
What do I need to do?
Use case, I think.
Okay, all right, we'll back up. So, is it out? So, the first three diagrams I showed you, class diagrams, sequence diagrams, and component diagrams, are what I consider to be design diagrams. So those are used to actually build or design solutions to the particular problem. The other two I'm going to show you, use case diagrams and activity diagrams, are really centered around analyzing the problem. So these are analysis diagrams.
And I think they want to know, how do you get there? I guess you go, your architecture menu, or?
No, this was just a model. I'd already pre-created this drawing. So this was in place. So I could create, how do you create these? Right, I've got a modeling project. Okay, so I've got a modeling project here in the solution. I do add an item, and here's all your choices: class, sequence, use case, activity, component.
There you go.
All right, so in this case I drew some of these ahead of time. So this one was the early, maybe this is iteration 1. And there's all kinds of cool stuff. You can highlight these in different colors and say, we're going to do this now. These are pushed off to later. We can go in and add in as much more detail as we like. All that good stuff. We can add in their own use cases, right? Receive coupons. We can say, this shopper can do that. You know what else? This shopper gets an inheritance, so they get to do everything. Registered shoppers can do everything that normal shoppers can do and more, right? So, again, more useful when you're kind of conceptualizing this, discussing it with your client, talk about what features they want to add. The next one is an activity diagram. I've got one of those here too, and really this is nothing more than a modern-day flowchart. It's got action nodes and then decision point nodes. You can do parallel operations, so I can fork this and show a business process happening, multiple things happening in parallel, and then synchronizing them back together with a join. Again, this can be used for design, but most of the time it's used when trying to understand what a business process is, and then hand this over to developers and say, okay, here's what the business needs to do, go design a solution for it. Right? So that's where that really comes into play. So those are the 5 UML diagrams we support. There are 13 total in the spec, but those are the 5 that we supported out of the box with 2010. The last thing I want to show you is being Microsoft, we can't just support standards. We have to add our own stuff. And you've already seen one of those. You saw the dependency graph. That's actually called the directed graph document. So that's one of the other types of models we support. There's also another one, the layer diagram. This is probably my favorite feature in any version of Visual Studio. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create one of those right now. And just like the other diagrams, I can go in and draw this. And so stop me if you've heard this one. Presentation layer. Business layer. Data access layer. Everybody heard of these before, right? This is where architects got a bad rap. All right, go build it, developers. Oh, wait a minute, I forgot to tell you. Yeah, the presentation layer talks to the business layer talks to the data access layer. Okay, now you got everything you need, go build it, right? And then as developers, we go off and build whatever we thought the solution should be anyway and completely throw this away. This has been the guidance for years, since, I don't know, mid-90s when I first started doing interior development. That's what we used to call it back in the day. It turns out there's a lot more we can do with this. We've learned quite a bit since then. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete that. Now, so let me go ahead and bring up my blog, because I want to show you some things here in a minute. So scroll down. So we've got the materials from our tour. And let me cue this up here real quick. So there's our slides. All right, let me come back. All right, so the Patterns and Practices group at Microsoft put together a book called the Application Architecture Guide. And in that book, they talk about 5 application archetypes: mobile applications, rich clients, rich internet, services, and web. And what they've been kind enough to do is out in the extension gallery, they've pre-created layer diagrams for all 5 application archetypes that they talk about in the book. So what we've got here is a web application, so I'm going to drag the web application archetype and drop it onto the diagram. So here's what we get. This is the full guidance from the book, including at the bottom of the diagram. Here's the name of the book, the chapter to read. It talks about what all these bubbles mean, and then a URL to go read it online. What I like to do, since this is an existing application that I really haven't got an architecture map to it, I like to start with this overall architecture archetype diagram and then start mapping it to my project. But first, let's get rid of some of the detail. Right? There's just too much guidance in here right now. We'll come back and revisit that later. So let's get rid of UI components, UI process components, application facades, workflow, business components, business entities, data access, helpers, service agents. All right, what are we left with? Well, to tell you the truth, it looks an awful lot like what we used to have. We got that presentation layer, business layer, and data layer. But like I said, we've learned so much since the early 90s. We now have this 4th bonus layer, the cross-cutting concerns. Right? We've come a long way. So what I'm going to do, let's go ahead and map this real quick. Let me bring up my toolbox. And all right, let's put some rules in place. All right, so the browser talks to the presentation layer. Presentation layer talks to the business layer. Shrink these up a hair. The business layer talks to the data layer. And you know what? We're going to let all 3 of those talk to the cross-cutting concerns layer. All right, now, voila, there's my architecture. Okay, developers, go build it. Not really. We're not done yet. Now, what I want to do, and this is the key to making this whole thing bring some value to us, is what I want to do is I want to actually map that architectural layer diagram to the code base we have in our project. So here's what I'm going to do. We're going to start at the top. I'm going to take tailspin.web. I'm going to click on the solution, the project and solution explorer, and I'm going to drag and drop it onto that layer. See a little 1 appear there? If I right-click on it and say View Links, there's the tailspin.web is linked to that particular layer. Let's go back to our solution file. Let's go and do the business layer. In this case, it's called tailspin.model. So I'm going to drag and drop that on there. I'm going to do the same thing with the data layer. In this case, it's called tailspin.simple SQL repository. I'm going to drag and drop that on there. And then finally, this last one is called tailspin.infrastructure. That's actually our cross-cutting concerns. I'm going to link that one. In fact, I'm going to rename this to a different word. It means the same thing, but just for clarity's sake, I'm going to rename it that. So, I might even come in and change all these. Tailspin web. Make this one tailspin, model. You can get as loose or tight as you want, right? That's the original guidance. The terms are up to you to map them to your project. Data repository. Tailspin infrastructure. Just a text box. All right, here's where the magic comes in. I'm going to save this diagram. Now I'm going to right-click on the background, and I'm going to say Validate the architecture. This is the magic, folks. It's going to make sure our project is compiled, and it's going to take a look at every single call between every class and every project, see if anything is trying to go around the rules I just put in place in that drawing. So if anything is calling a layer or calling a LL that I don't allow, we're going to get a rule violation. And sure enough, we've got 92 of them. So let's take a look at the first one. Invalid dependency, tailspin.simple SQL repository, simple customer repository.get customer. It's a method. It's trying to call tailspin.model.customer.customer, which is actually a constructor. So that's our first one. So what's that saying? That is saying that something inside of the repository is trying to call, in this case, it's trying to instantiate a business object inside tailspin.model. Now, according to the rules I've drawn here, that's not allowed. So for this particular case, I've broken my architecture, or my architecture is invalid, or another way to look at it is the source code is invalid against the architecture I designed. Now, I've got 2 options when this happens. I can redo my architecture to relax the constraints so that the existing code base will work, which is probably what I have to do in this case, or I can go rewrite the code. Right? In this case, it's a big legacy app. We're not going to get any kind of approval to go refactor it in a major way architecturally. So what I do in this case is I'm just going to go relax that constraint. I'm going to go say, you know what, let's go ahead and let it go the other way. But in this particular case, I know that the user interface, the web layer, is actually calling the repository directly. Remember our sequence diagram? That controller inside web was actually calling a product repository. So I know there's one more line that has to be in place here. If I can grab it, I'll move it out of the way here. Drag it over here. There we go. There we go. So that is actually the true architecture of this application. In fact, I think if I run it now, it gets rid of almost all the errors. So let's validate it real quick. And that, folks, that's the power of this. Not just that there's lines and boxes, but we can actually truly map it to our source code and prove out an architecture and make sure we maintain architectural integrity, which is pretty important when you start getting those projects where the UI goes straight to the database and bypasses any and all logic that they should be applying on their way. So you can see I've done it here interactively. I've done it by just right-clicking and do validate. You can also put these in builds. So if I go over to my team build here, you connect to TFS real quick. Go check out my build script. If I edit my build definition, I've got one here for my second iteration. A little time on the screen, but if I go down to process, we go to the advanced tab. It's nothing more than an MS build argument. If you do /p for parameter and say validate architecture equals true, then in your build server, it will validate all of the layer diagrams in the entire solution file, and if any of them are invalid, it fails the build. So there's the true power of this when it comes down to it. And that's how I would use it. All right, that is the last of our diagrams. So hopefully you guys see some value in that. I think this is just the bee's knees, as they say. This is the best feature I've ever seen from an architectural perspective. All right, you know what, while I'm in the build, I want to point this out. For those of you who haven't seen this, the new options, if you're using TFS and you're doing continuous integration, there's a new option in here. So here's your choices right now. You got manual, right? So for manual check-in, I just go to TFS and I right-click our manual build, and I just say queue a new build, right? It's set up to do it manually. You turn on continuous integration, and every check-in automatically prompts a build and runs all your tools. You can do rolling builds every so many minutes or after a certain number of builds or a certain number of check-ins. This one's new. It's called a gated check-in. What this does is when you check in your source code, it's just like doing a continuous integration build, but it does not check your code all the way into the source code repository yet. What it does is it shelves it temporarily, runs a private build against your shelved code, and only if that passes does it actually push the check-in all the way through. So in other words, there's no shame or retribution for ever breaking the shared build ever again. No one ever knows that it broke except for you. This is the option that all the Visual Studio team members, all 1,000 of them, are required to use because they cannot break that build. The way they do their builds is it's a stream straight to the user, right, or straight to the customer. They always have a shippable product, so what gets into the build server and gets compiled every night is potentially a gold master for tomorrow if we have to stop and ship. So having gated check-ins prevents us from ever getting broken builds ever again. It's just an awesome thing. Ooh, lots of good stuff. So hopefully I've highlighted some new things for you here. While I'm in there, let me see what else I've got on my plate here. Ooh, branching and merging. This is cool. Let me go over back to Team Explorer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my source control here real quick. And one thing new, notice, for those of you who use TFS, and specifically those of you who have done branching, in the past there was no indicator where a branch occurred. Now we've got this little icon, see, little main? That tells you that there's a branch off of that. I've got branches off of iteration 1, iteration 2. Now, I'm going to check the history. So I'm going to right-click on it and say View History. And it's going to show me all the change sets that have been applied to main. And, you know, it doesn't matter. Pick any one. I'm going to pick 13. And I'm going to view Track Change Set. Right-click on it and say Track Change Set. Or you can do it from the toolbar. What this is going to do is go and look at all the different branches. And it'll ask me, what branches do you want to see this in? So I just say All. And it's going to actually show me where that change set moved. So in this particular case, change set 13 was the one I'm looking at, came from changes 11 and 12, which were merged together from iteration 1 into main. So we can see that that's how it came about visually. Now it gets better. This is just a very simple hierarchical view. If I click on the timeline tracking button, it switches the viewpoint so that you can actually see it as time progresses. So you can see where change set 11 occurred, change set 12, and then the time and point where change set 13 happened. If you're doing this kind of change control and change tracking, and you're managing iterations where you need to move things forward. It's a very common scenario for a customer to ship software out and have to support it in production, right? So you've got service packs and service releases. Well, if you get bug fixes rolled into your main, you also want to apply those to other branches. So with this particular view, and this is a fairly undocumented feature, you kind of have to be taught how to do this. To move a change set into a different branch it's not in, you literally drag and drop it. So I grabbed 13. I could grab 11 or 12. Drag and drop it onto the branch you want it to go into. You get the merge resolution dialog. I'm going to say finish here. I think there are some conflicts, so I'll get the conflict window. Yeah, sure enough, there's a couple conflicts, but I could go through that and merge that. But the big picture I want to show you is it's so darn easy to move change sets between branches now. It's just amazing stuff. And nobody else that I've seen has this kind of capability. So just very, very cool stuff. All right, let's see. We've got a few more minutes here. What I thought I'd do is kind of with what I call kind of the whopper here, the big feature, and that's Intellitrace. So, make a long story short, for those of you who have ever seen news footage of an airplane or a helicopter that crashes, they can dig this black box out of the wreckage of that aircraft, right? And that black box, it's on every airplane, and what it does is it records all the instrument panel data as the airplane flies or as the aircraft flies. And these things are practically indestructible. They can't melt. So what they do is they dig those out of the wreckage, they play back all the instrument panel data, and they take a look at what's going on inside that as that accident occurred. We've created a tool called Intellitrace. It's part of Visual Studio. It's also part of our testing tools. And what this tool does is it actually records the entire call stack of your application as it runs. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and turn it on. I'll go to Tools, Options. It's got its own panel here in Intellitrace called Intellitrace, its own tree. We'll walk through it real quick. So here's Enable Intellitrace. I've got it enabled already. It's actually I shouldn't have. It takes a pretty big performance hit. I should have noticed that was why we were running a little slow. So what you want to do is you want to turn it on when you want to use it, when you want this information. You don't want to leave it on all the time like I just did. You have two options. You can record just the events, or you can record the events and all the call stack information. I highly recommend number two. Number one, just recording the events is fairly worthless, right? Oh yeah, a website request came through. Oh yeah, an exception just happened. But there's no data. If you're going to use this, you really want to get all the good data. So I recommend when you turn it on, you do events and call information. It writes to a file. You can tell it where to put it on your hard drive. It's a rolling truncating file. You can set the size limit if you want. It's just an XML-based file. You can tell it to, and here, this is pretty important, enable Team Foundation's server symbol path lookup. So this is going to be cool, and I'll show you this later on. If we have this file, we can tell it to embed the TFS location for the source code, and we can actually trace this through source code. So we'll show that in a few minutes. Here are the events that you can record. Here's the defaults that are checked. So everything ADO.NET related, all the executes are recorded. So these are things that trigger a recording. ASP.NET requests. You can do console reads and writes, data binding, environment variable changes, file touches, gestures, which are interactivity with the UI. Since this is instrumenting .NET applications, it does support Windows Forms, Web Forms, and WPF. They are saying support for Silverlight's coming, but it is not there right now. We can do, all kinds of stuff, registry, services, threads, all the good stuff. Anyway, what you see checked are the defaults. And then finally, you can tell it to include or exclude modules that you don't want to be traced. In this case, we've already included .NET 2.0, 3.0, 3.5, 4.0, and a couple of other Microsoft goodies. So we will not be instrumenting and recording those because that's just a bunch of noise. So I've got it turned on. I'll click OK. And I'm going to go ahead and run my app real quick. I say real quick. Remember, this is going to take a pretty big performance hit. What are we doing? We're recording every call and the call stack and all the call stack information on every one of those events and writing it to an XML file. So we're looking at an order of magnitude decrease in performance. So you don't want this on all the time. You only want it on when you really want this historical information. All right, let's get it up and running. All right. Now, when it runs, we get once I enable Intellitrace, a new panel appears in Visual Studio called Intellitrace. And what we're going to do is we're going to run the app and get a little bit of data here. Order of magnitude slower, folks. You're seeing it here. What it's doing is actually going in and instrumenting into the DLL as it's loaded by the CPU and plugging in logging code automatically into the code base. So that first hit's actually the slowest. It picks up pretty quickly after that initial JIT. All right, so there we go. So let me just create some data here. All right, so I'm going to switch back to Visual Studio, and I'm going to say break all. And what we get in the Intellitrace panel is a list of chronological events that occurred all the way back to when the app started. Now I could filter this. I could say, you know what, just give me, I don't know, let's see, ADO.NET and maybe exceptions. Just give me a couple things. I can do a keyword filter, product, I'll highlight it, and here's where the fun starts. If I want to see that data, I click on one of these. It expands that panel in place, so here you can see the call that I just made, and it also takes me to the line of code where that occurred. And now I can also switch calls view, so staying within the same panel, I'm still one event, but if I switch to the call stack view, you see we're at the very top of the call stack, and I can walk backwards by double-clicking, and notice it takes me down in the call stack, and then once I get down below the top, I can see these little glyphs that let me walk through, and if I look at the call stack information, there we go. You see all of the data as it was recorded on the call stack. You see all the parameters. I need more monitor or more screen real estate here, but you can see all the values in the call stack. Remember, it is only instrumenting method calls with no parameters and return values, so no intermediate variables are collected. Right? This local variable is not being recorded. That would be even more expensive to try to record everything. So it is an instrumentation. It's a logging for your data, so it's not recording every single line of code. That's what our debugger's for. So think of it this way. We will. The idea right now is this is meant to be used in development and pre-production. So in QA, we'll have our testers running our apps with an Intellitrace agent installed on their boxes. That way they can trap these bugs, get us an Intellitrace file, which is nothing more than an XML file. We load it up in Visual Studio, and we walk through the project, and we find the problem. So this is completely designed to solve that non-reproducible bug issue, right? Testers find a bug, kick it over to us. We can't reproduce it on our box. Kick it back, kick it back, kick it back. It's a soccer ball, goes back and forth. So the idea is that we can get the testers to run this agent on their testing machines and get us this file, get it back to us. We can completely solve this problem once and for all. What I call the F5 experience, which is doing this inside of Visual Studio. The more likely scenario is you would use Microsoft Test Manager. I'm not going to go in how to set that up today, but if you're interested, email Zane or myself, and we can certainly set up a follow-up where we can walk you through Test Manager. It is included with Visual Studio Ultimate, so if you've got Ultimate, you can already do all this stuff yourself.
Hey, Clint, quick question: and I forget, does this give execution time? Does it show you? Does Intellitrace show timings? I seem to recall that it did.
It is inside the file. It doesn't show it in the IDE by default, so you don't see the timings in here. But to be honest with you, the timings are not representative of performance because you're writing to a file, and that can throw in some pretty big lag. So,
oh yeah, that's right. That's why the file throws it off. Okay.
Yeah. Who knows? It might be buffered. It might not. I wouldn't use this to look at execution time. What I would use it for, though, this is pretty cool, and not a lot of people do this, is every now and then just turn on Intellitrace and just see how many exceptions your app is getting on a perfectly running application. See what exceptions you're getting. Right? Because the normal assumption is if your app's running fine, you're not getting exceptions, because exceptions aren't there for logic flow. They're only there for critical errors. So it might be nice to just see, what kind of weird stuff's going on in an app you think is running normally. In this particular case, they actually did the wrong thing. They're using exceptions for logic flow. What they do is, I won't go into too much, but they look for views in a particular location, and they just do a try-catch, and if it's not there, then they go look somewhere else, rather than actually open and see if the file's there. So anyway, to answer your question, no, they do not do timings at this point. But that data is in a file. And it is just an XML file. So if you wanted to write a little app that parsed through that and check that out. In fact, I think, do you know, Zane, are there any power tools out there for Intellitrace yet?
I haven't looked for any yet. I'm just starting to start my series on it. So.
Yeah, I don't think there are. I think folks are still too new to it to really have invested that much time. But it's a great feature. So what I want to kind of close with here is I'm going to stop debugging and get that panel out of the way. Debug, stop debugging. So what I showed you is what I call the F5 experience. You won't normally use Visual Studio to do Intellitrace because you've got a rich debugger. What we want to do is get that file from someone else. So Microsoft Test Manager has basically the same exact instrumentation. So I go into options in my tests and I say turn on Intellitrace, and it's got the exact same options, the file location, what modules to include or exclude, what events to listen for. The testers run Test Manager, triggers Intellitrace, runs through their tests, and the ultimate goal is for them to send us a bug. Right? So if I go into my work items here, I think I've got a bug from yesterday. Yeah, here's a bug. Intellitrace. If I scroll down, you'll see there's the test case from Microsoft Test Manager. It includes all the steps that they were taking during the test. Scroll through here, where they stopped, right? Here's where the last passing part of the test was. If they had turned on their video recorder, they could have actually recorded a video and attached that automatically too. But what I really want is this Intellitrace file. If I click on that bad boy, it's going to open it up from the source server, right, or from the TFS server where it was uploaded. It's just an XML file. Give me this nice summary showing me, in this case, you know, I say nice, it's a bunch of threads with no names. But what I want to do is just kick this off. I just click on any one of these errors, and it's actually going to launch Intellitrace and take me to that particular error. Now from here, I can go over to the events. I can do all my normal browsing, all that good stuff. Back in Intellitrace.
Hey, Clint, got a question from Tom. Can you use it to record? Use this to record during unit testing in the TFS auto build?
Can you use this to do unit testing, record unit testing in auto build? No. To my understanding, the only two places this runs, well, you know, that's not true. It's not true. By default, you can run it inside of Visual Studio interactively, and Microsoft Test Manager can also run it interactively. But we do ship the Intellitrace on what we call the feature agent pack. So there is an ISO image out on MSDN you can download with all the agents, including Intellitrace agent. You can run it on a box, standalone, right? It's just an executable. You can spin it up as a service, set the XML config file, and tell it all the settings, and then have it run on a machine remotely, and it just generates the file. You know, so you absolutely could do that. The real value that we try to bring is the only place you can interpret that Intellitrace file visually and walking through your code base is inside of Visual Studio, right? So we do allow you to run this agent anywhere and collect Intellitrace files. The value add we provide, and that's free, by the way, the value add we provide is the Visual Studio is the way you would consume those. Hopefully that answers your question. So yes, you can run it. You'd have to go look at the docs to see how to configure it all, but you can do it. Yep. Now, right now, it's meant for pre-production use, right? So we don't recommend running this in anything but Dev and QA. However, they said, oh, yeah, it does support Azure. In fact, this is the only way to instrument and trace and debug apps out in Azure. I could do a whole other talk on that. But they claim, the Visual Studio team claims, for the next version of Visual Studio, they will have tuned this for production use. So the idea is you will have this running out on your servers in production. And if and when you have problems, you know, it'll be dialed down so it's not active. If and when your customers start complaining, you'll call your operations folks, say, dial up Intellitrace, dial it up, trap that error, get them to send you the file, and dial it back down, and then we're in business, right? And that gets us production level support without having to have direct access to production. So that's the ultimate end game for Intellitrace, and that's coming in the next version of Visual Studio. And again, you can put that agent anywhere. We can collect data from all over the planet. It's really the power of being able to walk through your code base with that thing is where we really shine. All right, you know, folks, with that, I think we're going to wrap it up. I know we didn't end up going the full length, but I think we covered what we want to cover. Anything else you wanted to add real quick, Zane?
No, I just want to say thanks for coming, folks. I appreciate you coming out. We set a new record, and we got some real good data we've collected. So you're going to see more of these, hopefully, and not going to get anything but better. Thanks to everybody.
Yep. If you head out to notsotrivial.net, my blog, you'll see the slides are available, as well as the Patterns and Practices Application Architecture Guide I talked about. You can download that. There's another ALM guidebook for those of you interested in doing more with Intellitrace and the testing tools. And I also have a link to that architecture layer diagram extension out in the gallery, so if you guys want to check that out too. So with that, we apologize for any and all issues with the meeting. We had no idea we'd get this many turned out today, so thanks for those of you sticking with us, and have a great day.